So I would say that the three key elements here are your purpose on this earth,
Mhm.
blended with your skill set, blended with kind of your heart center.
Okay.
So know what you're here to do, know how you're able to do it, and then figuring out who you are at your core so that you're able to attract and interact with the people that you're going to be most impactful with.
Welcome to the Rooted in Community podcast. My name is Celia Coughlin Surridge, and I'm here to bring authentic, community-focused conversations about online marketing to you on a bi-weekly basis. Let's face it, getting the word out about your nonprofit, service, or product is one of the first obstacles anyone faces when trying to grow their organization. Between all of the different social media platforms, opinions shared by influencers and podcasters, and the bells and whistles that are all screaming for your attention, a state of overwhelm seems right around the corner. Thankfully, it doesn't have to be that way. Grab a cup of coffee, pull up a chair, and relax as we discuss online marketing tips, tricks, techniques, and strategies to grow your audience by providing value to those you serve. In today's episode, I sit down with Jill Knobeloch of GrapeSeed Designs based in Chicago, Illinois. GrapeSeed Designs specializes in providing branding design, web design and development, and marketing strategy to equestrian businesses. Now, working in the equestrian field is a fairly recent development for Jill. But as we get into our chat, you'll hear why I felt she would be the perfect expert for this discussion on defining your why and how to use that information to market your organization. It is my hope that at the end of this episode, you'll feel like pulling out that notepad and writing your business's messaging. Without further ado. Well, welcome, Jill. I am so excited to have you here. You are our very first guest on the Rooted in Community podcast.
No
And-
pressure.
yeah, right. No pressure at all. And before I turn it over to fully introduce you, we actually met through the Being Boss online community, which I think I mentioned last episode. I'm probably going to keep talking about it. But I've been a member since pretty much quarantine kicked in, and I'm not sure how long have you been a member of Being Boss?
Oh man, I mean, the community launched not long before that, I feel like, but
Mhm.
I started following Kathleen, who is technically no longer part of Being Boss,
Yeah.
when she was freelance. So before she even started Braid.
Oh man.
So
Okay.
then, yeah, so I was following her for a while. I found their podcast maybe a year or two after they started it.
Mhm.
So I listened to a couple of their first episodes, but it was before podcasting was getting big. I didn't really get into it. But trying to remember when they started that, but I've been listening to their podcast for years, and I was part of Emily's mastermind last year, and so when the community launched, I was like, "Yep, I am in on this." So,
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited. Emily is going to be joining us in a couple of months. All of the
oh,
details are to be announced. But really, truthfully, being a part of that community is what brought this podcast to fruition. And I think it's a really good example of why community is so important. You know, community brings people
yes,
together. So with that said, I would love to invite Jill to tell us a little bit more about her. And, before I open up the floor to you, I just want to say, the reason why I pulled you in for this episode is that our topic today is knowing your why. And I think that you have a really great journey to share with our listeners. So with that, Jill, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that you do?
of course. So, I mean, going all the way back to when I was a kid, I was always like super artsy and entrepreneurial, like even in like elementary and middle school. Kind of developed in high school, started getting into photography and editorial design, and wound up getting a BFA in graphic design. And then I have pretty much followed that course. I feel like I'm kind of one of the oddballs that's actually still using my degree directly in my work.
Mhm.
And that grew into graphic design, a little bit of branding. I come from a family of engineers, so transitioning into web development and learning some of those coding languages, that was just, a super easy transition. And then from there, I got in with a couple of companies that were a little bit more software focused, and just my skill set has continued growing, from one stage to the next. So now I offer branding and digital strategy. With everything from strategic positioning to copywriting to graphic design, web design and development. I do user interface design for software and mobile apps, and I top it all off with a little bit of marketing strategy. So I basically just try to take a very holistic approach to my customers' brands and just make sure that their online presence is smooth from beginning to end, and it's just a clear message to their potential customers. Again, from first touch all the way through the sale and into client nurture.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and so really getting into that topic of knowing your why, you yourself obviously had to go through these steps to build your own business, and you had to come up with your own particular messaging. And actually, recently you've made the decision to go more into equestrian work. And if you're not familiar with the term, that's horses, right?
Mhm.
Horseback riding.
Having to do with horses.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And so I would love to find out kind of like your journey of what brought you there, first of all, if you were a little scared about niching down to something so specific. And then we can start talking about how that really intertwines with your messaging. I just want to know about that journey.
For sure. Well, it was kind of an unexpected twist fairly recently, but it shouldn't have been. When it first came up that somebody reflected back on me that I should really be focusing on equine businesses,
Hmm.
it was one of those moments where it was like, duh, why have I not been doing this my whole life?
Hmm.
So going back to that same, like when I was young, creative, elementary school, I started riding horses when I was 7 years old. And I was just almost obsessed. I mean, my mom will tell you the story that on my 6th birthday, I started counting down the days to my 7th birthday because that's how old I had to be before I could ride.
Oh,
So, my parents put me into lessons. I've never owned or leased a horse. Anybody who's not familiar with equestrian world, it's a very expensive world.
hmm,
So I just did everything that I could to stay involved with them. So I took lessons. I started volunteering at the barn during the summers when most kids were at home watching Saturday morning cartoons. I was getting a ride over to the barn and I would just stay there all day, whether it was mucking stalls or I got to the point where in middle school I was teaching very, very young kids how to be around horses, teaching them about tack, teaching them about grooming. And that's just been a common theme across the course of my life that I had summer jobs in college that were either I was managing a barn or there was one summer that I was giving guided horseback tours through Garden of the Gods in Colorado. Um, but as I got older and graduated college and, adulting became such a thing, it's like you had to focus on a job, on making money. And as expensive as it is to be a participant in the equestrian world, it's
hmm,
not always super lucrative to work in the equestrian world.
yeah.
There are certainly some branches that you can definitely do very well, but the branches that I was involved in, it just didn't make sense. I could do so much more with my degree. Of course, I had student loans. Another theme throughout my entire life is ice hockey. I was also a referee for, it's been 20 years now, but I was working on an international career with that. So it was spread very, very thin, and I kind of fell out of the horse world for a little while.
Hmm.
So I mentioned that I was in Emily's mastermind last year, and that small group, there were four of us plus Emily. Um, I was kind of struggling with how to differentiate myself. I've got a very broad skill set. I didn't necessarily want to focus in on any one particular skill and niche down that way. So it was hard for me to explain, what made me different than any other uh, web designer. Why would you hire me over somebody who will build you a $500 website?
Right.
And to get into those details took a lot of as much as I try to stay away from it, kind of jargon and technical language, and it took a lot to explain. So I spun my wheels a lot on trying to kind of differentiate myself in a fairly saturated market. So in this mastermind, we were going through on one of my hot seat days, and I don't remember how it came up, but they got me started talking about horses. And actually, now that I think about this, it might not have even been my hot seat. Like it might have just been something out of the blue came up about horses, and I just lit up and took off. And I don't know how long I talked about whatever it was, but they all kind of looked at me and they're like, "Why are you not doing this?
Right.
Like, you're speaking a language that none of us understands, but it is clearly so fluent for you, and you are so excited and so passionate, and we've never seen you this excited to talk about anything. So why aren't you focusing on equestrian businesses?"
Mhm.
And that was when that kind of light bulb went off, and I was like, yeah, like hockey was one of those things I found out a way to monetize it and kind of turn that into a career, but working with horses hadn't made that transition, and this was very clearly that bridge. So, to be honest, it took a little while for me to get a good picture about how to make that transition,
Mhm.
and it was a little bit scary. I had some clients that were keeping me fairly busy, and I somewhat regrettably stayed in that safe zone. I didn't necessarily take these ideas and just run with them. But as some of that work started to slow down and I had a little bit more space to breathe, I was like, I'm not going to pursue clients that I'm not in love with.
Right.
And so I changed my messaging, I changed the graphics and the visuals on my website, my social media. And to be honest, my messaging didn't actually change that much.
Mhm.
It just started adding in a little bit more language about, equestrian businesses. When I have examples of things that certain businesses are doing, I try to tailor them a little bit more, into the equine world. But the core messaging is still about branding. It's about your online presence. It's about marketing. So it's just about taking that focus and really narrowing it down to a particular customer, which honestly makes my marketing message so much more targeted and so much more clear. And it's so much easier for me to put it out there and for people to identify and be like, yes, this resonates for me. This is the person that I'm supposed to be working with.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, that's you mentioned it, it's a little scary, but I think that you hit the nail on the head, which is that when you're able to identify what you're passionate about and you're putting it effectively in your branding and your messaging, then you are speaking directly to your customer base or whoever your organization is trying to reach. Like if you're a nonprofit, if you're able to actually explain what it is that you do succinctly and speak to the people that you are trying to reach, that's all knowing your why, then you're effectively able to market so much better. It makes it so much easier. But it is scary because you think where is my money going to come from? And if I only know one business right now that may purchase from me, how am I supposed to reach the rest of the United States or the world for that matter? So it's scary regardless. For you, did was it the mastermind that was able to help you kind of step into the like, okay, I'm okay with this? Or is it because you were so passionate? What made you decide that, okay, I'm not going to worry about some of the fraudy feelings or the ifs or whys of where money is going to come from? Where did you find the confidence to move forward with this decision, basically?
Honestly, a lot of it had to do with COVID. As everything kind of crashed down, a lot of those clients that I had, that client base that was keeping me steady and keeping me in that safe zone, started drying up. So I had space that I had to pursue marketing. I had to be doing more outreach in one way or another. It was no longer just coming to me. And I was like, if I'm having to reach out in this way, I might as well focus on the things that I'm really truly in love with.
Mhm.
Um, and that kind of fear of, if I speak directly to this one very narrow target, and I, like you said, if I only know one business who might buy from me. And honestly, when I started doing this, I didn't even know one business that might buy from me. I'm in the city of Chicago. Like, we don't have like all of my network here in the city that I've been building for the last several years has nothing to do with horses.
Right.
But when I started asking for equestrian referrals, people weren't necessarily referring the businesses that I would be working directly with, but everybody knew somebody that had a horse or rode at a barn or, was interested in it. So I was able to kind of build out a network that way and just start listening to that specific community a little bit better,
Hmm.
which not only helped me make connections without coming across as salesy,
Right.
because I legitimately wanted to schedule these calls to find out what people were doing with their businesses, what unique issues they were, struggling with. And I could have those calls as a learning experience for me. And it wasn't high pressure for them that, hey, at the end of this call, there's going to be a big sales pitch, be on your guard for it.
Right.
But another thing that kind of comes into that is the phrase shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land in the stars. Scientifically, there's problems with that phrase, and that's the nerd in me saying that. But I think it's kind of like that with our messaging. Even if you are speaking very specifically to one niche, other people will read themselves into your story,
Hmm.
which has been interesting to me that, I focus on equestrian businesses. And in particular, I really focus on equine tech. So that's mobile apps and software that are serving the equine community or equestrian alternative wellness. So chiropractors, massage therapists, acupuncture, physical therapists. Um, but even in targeting those folks, I get a lot of canine businesses. Folks will be like, "Oh, you work with horses. Do you work with dog businesses?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll definitely do that." And I love dogs almost as much as I love horses. So
Yeah.
I've got no problem working with those kind of businesses. And actually, when I transitioned my messaging, I thought about saying equine and canine businesses, but that starts muddying the waters again. It starts making the messaging a little bit more complicated. And as we're seeing, I'm still getting folks that are reading themselves into the message. They're like, well, I'm not exactly what you're looking for, which, by the way, makes it a lot easier to say no if it's not a good fit.
Right.
But would you consider working with XYZ? And then we get to have a conversation, and it starts the collaboration right there from the very beginning.
Hmm.
It's not this cookie cutter, I'm going to buy this product from you, and it's just, signed, sealed, delivered, and that's it. It's figuring out what's best for both the customer and my working style all at the same time.
Right.
And I've got other communities that I'm involved in too. So I'm also working on building a co working space right now. So I'm also in communities that are focused on that. They got nothing to do with the equestrian world, but when I talk about the branding and marketing and those sorts of expertise items that I bring to the table for my equestrian clients, it starts resonating in that community too. So here and there, I've picked up actually some really pretty fantastic clients in the co-working space as well. So my messaging is very, very targeted, and I would love it if my roster was nothing but equestrian businesses. But
Hmm.
the truth is, I'm still getting clients that are outside of that niche that I actually still really love
Right.
because I'm passionate about the message that I'm putting out, and people are attracted to that passion.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, I just love it. And I think it really so naturally has led to what your brand messaging is, which actually I should go ahead and ask you since you're the expert. Could you explain exactly what brand messaging is? And obviously we've been talking about why it's so important, but if you were to break it down for someone who doesn't understand any of this, what is brand messaging?
Yeah. So when people think about a brand or they hear about a branding designer, everybody goes straight to your logo.
Mhm.
Maybe they'll kind of branch out a little bit into your colors and your typography. And if you're lucky, you might get folks that understand that it's your entire visual palette that is your colors, the tone of your images, the style of your images, and how you pull it all together in anything that's visual. But the truth is that your branding is more than just the graphics, too. It's the way that you show up online, in person, in any place that you exist.
Mhm.
So it's the graphics, it's also the particular language and voice that you use. Are you very formal, like a lawyer might be, or are you a lot more, friendly and I'm going to get this word wrong, jovial, I guess. I'm blending that with another word. Are you more jovial and friendly? Um, some business owners, they want to full on own anything and everything about themselves. So they're going tattoos, piercing, colored hair, and they're dropping the F bomb left and right. And that's part of their branding. It's not necessarily better or worse. It's just part of who they are, how they show up online, and it winds up communicating with their ideal customer.
Hmm.
So your brand messaging is basically just anything that you have written, anything that's visual that represents who you are
Hmm.
to the people that you might be potentially working with.
Right. Yeah. So when someone's sitting down and they're going, okay, I'm gonna basically work on my brand messaging and I'm gonna make it more clear, where do we go? I think one of the first steps is really, going back to your why, making sure that, you're weaving that into your messaging. And so do you have any suggestions on what our listeners could do to define their why? Are there a few steps specifically that they should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it can be really hard to do, but you have to distill very narrow. If you had one person, one dream person that you would love to work with for, the rest of your life, what would they look like? What are they interested in? How do they interact with you? And what are their particular interests and their goals and missions in life? So, this is kind of touching on a marketing concept of ICAs, which is your ideal customer avatar. Really, when you're centering your branding and your messaging, you want to go deeper than the actual person and kind of figure out, what is your mission in life? What is your core? What are you balanced on? And kind of why do you exist on this planet if we want to go super existential? And then you can kind of start building from there. So if you find your very narrow center that you are grounded in and nobody can knock you off that center pole, and then you can branch out from there. You're like, so for me, really, my center is languages.
Hmm.
So I also did a double minor in college. I studied German and Russian language, studied Italian while I was in Italy, and I self studied American Sign Language. So when I went to college, I was either going to do languages or art. And my degree wound up going in the direction of art, but I have always felt like myself, I am founded on authenticity, like cut out all the BS and focus on what's real, and then taking that and translating it for different communities, different people. So the message might be a little bit different for my mom than it is for my best friend, than it is for somebody that overheard a conversation in a coffee shop and just wants like a 10-second, hey, what do you do? That sounded interesting. Um, and I do that for my clients. So that really my very, very core center. And it's not necessarily something I talk about a lot, but it's about being able to translate. So I can absorb what people know and are talking about. And a lot of businesses that are very technical don't necessarily speak to laymen very well. And
Hmm.
so that's really where my core genius is that I'm able to kind of absorb what they're talking about and then translate it in a way that resonates with people kind of outside of their niche and their expertise.
Hmm.
Um, and then from there, I come back to, that value of authenticity. At my roots, the equestrian world is, I mean, deep down in my core. I come most alive when I'm with horses. They've been some of my best teachers in my life. I'm most settled and, again, centered when I'm around them. So if I'm able to blend kind of my purpose in life, my core genius of being able to translate with my skills of being artistic and having this degree in graphic design, and do it for people who really connect with my heart center in the equestrian world, which that's a whole language in and of itself, that then I'm able to already understand it and translate it out to the rest of the world a little more quickly. Being able to blend those three things together, I think, is really just where my sweet spot is.
Wow. Yeah. I think that those are amazing steps. Could you summarize those three steps again for our listeners who are taking notes? Let's just hit those three specific bullet points again.
So I would say that the three key elements here are your purpose on this earth,
Hmm.
blended with your skill set, blended with kind of your heart center.
Okay.
So know what you're here to do, know how you're able to do it, and then figuring out who you are at your core so that you're able to attract and interact with the people that you're going to be most impactful with.
So with these ideals in mind and this kind of like blueprint of what our listeners need to do to really define who they are in their brand messaging, what is your suggestion on key next steps? Is website your first place of going, or is it your social media, or is it everything?
Yeah. So, I mean, before you can even get into your actual online presence, like you need to make sure that your messaging itself is clear. So, again, going back to those ICAs, that ideal customer avatar, knowing who it is that you're speaking to, really having a solid foundation on what you're offering to the world, um, and then being able to craft that message. So, I'm a graphic designer. People usually come to me for websites, but the truth is that the design and the website is usually the last 20% of what I do. And the first 80% is usually working around solidifying who they are and how they show up in the world. But
Mhm.
once you have that done and you're really focusing on your online presence, your outreach, those sorts of things, for the most part, I agree with you that a website is important to have. Like it is your home base, it is where people can come to you to get a consistent, unfiltered, unalgorithmed message.
Right.
So a website is definitely essential. Um, but I mean, it kind of depends on what your business is too. I've worked with some customers that they're just not at a point where they can deal with a website. If they're product based, for example, maybe they just need to make some sales. So Etsy might be a good spot. And, for their first 6 months to a year, they can work with and craft and kind of mold what their aesthetic looks like, what their tone looks like in their product listings. Maybe they've got their shop on Etsy, but then they're able to dig a little bit more into that ICA, their aesthetics, and their voice and their actual messaging on an Instagram account. So there are baby steps that you can take prior to launching a website.
Mhm.
But the important thing to remember with all of those things is that you don't own your Etsy shop. You have access to a corner of the Etsy world. You don't own your Instagram handle, even. That's just access to a corner of the Instagram world. And honestly, any content that you put on Instagram, Facebook, whatever else, you don't own that content anymore either. So
Right.
those are really important things for people to be aware of. Even your audience, if Instagram changes their algorithm, you may all of a sudden you could have 20 million followers, but if Instagram changes their algorithm and now you're reaching 20, your business has basically had its legs cut out from under it altogether. So that's why it becomes important to have your own website that nobody can take that content, nobody can turn it off. If Instagram was out the window next week, anybody that's got 20 million followers, again, their legs just got taken out from under them if they don't have their home base on the internet. So, website's very, very important. Also, your own email list. So, all of these followers that we talk about, that 20 million on Instagram, if Instagram disappears or they change their algorithm, you no longer have access to 20 million people. However, if you've built a newsletter contact list that has 20 million people on it, people might not read every email that you send, but you don't have anybody that can take that list away from you.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of different ways that you can get out online, that you can practice your voice, practice your aesthetics. But it is, like you said, very important that you have that home base with your website, even if it's just a simple landing page, and a newsletter list, that you have that direct contact with an audience that is truly dedicated to you.
Right. Yeah. And we'll be diving into email lists at another episode, but we'll touch on it right now that it's really important when trying to grow that list that you create some type of reason for people to subscribe. And actually, this
Mhm.
is a really good opportunity for you to kind of test out that new brand messaging why for yourself, because you want to create an opt-in or something to get a subscriber that they see that's valuable. So you want to create something or offer something on your website that your potential client or customer will want to subscribe for. So, like my knowledge base is, opt-ins like a checklist, or with like a product base, maybe like a percentage off of an email. Jill, do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, so in my case, and I'm still working on it, but one of my freebies that I'm going to put up in exchange for an email address is basically a branding checklist. So my why, beyond knowing my niche, my equestrian, and like why I'm connecting with them, my why, my mission in the world is to basically help people explain themselves better.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a PDF that I'm putting together that helps people kind of check those details off and show up more efficiently in their world without having to think about it too much.
Right.
So, yeah, that ties directly into my why, but is also the reason that people come to me. It's what I'm putting out into the world as my kind of core mission. And it's also the purpose that people are coming to me in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, being the first official interviewee guest for Rooted in Community. Mary Nauer joined me for our first episode, but she's going to be a regular co-host. So you're our first guest. Jill, can you please tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can work with you, where you are?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It was really an honor and fun for the last little bit chatting with you. You can find my website. It is grapeseeddesigns.com. That's grape like the fruit, seed like what's inside of the fruit, and designs with an S at the end. There's also a newsletter list there. We're currently going through a series on DIYing your brand. That's also showing up on the blogs on the website. But of course, join the newsletter list. You'll get all those tips and insights directly to your inbox, as well as periodic kind of insider details that aren't necessarily public. You can also find my Instagram at GrapeSeed Designs on, well, that's Instagram.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. I really super appreciate you coming and talking with us. I think this is a wonderful way to share this topic with our listeners. And I hope that you enjoy your holiday season, which is right around the corner.
It is fantastic. Thank you so much.
I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Jill of GrapeSeed Designs as much as I did. It really goes to show that spending time reflecting on why you do what you do will help you improve your organization's overall messaging and marketing presence. If you'd like to find out more about Jill or the Rooted in Community podcast, check out our show notes at www.ricpodcast.com. As our podcast is just getting started, it takes listeners like you to help us get the word out. Please like us or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from and leave a review if you've enjoyed today's episode. The Rooted in Community podcast is brought to you by Modern Roots Marketing, where we believe online marketing should be rooted in community.